entitled to be. He just said King of Ice Cream, so here's to that. He's the co-founder of Ben & Jerry's and why we have Ben & Jerry's tonight, so thank you, Ben. Along with retired Colonel Larry Wilkerson. So thank you all for coming, and I'll welcome you up to the stage.
Thanks very much, Olivia, and many thanks to old friends and new friends for coming out tonight. I'm honored to be up here, flanked by two courageous military heroes. On my left, Command Chief Major Sergeant, retired Dennis Fritz, who was at the very top of the Pentagon, advising some of the generals whose names we've all heard about. He was also the Chief Commander of Space Force, were you not?
Chief of Space Command.
You know, many jobs, and Larry Wilkerson, Colonel Larry Wilkerson, was the Chief of Staff to Colin Powell. So these are guys that were involved in many of the major decisions that our country has undertaken, and they've had the courage to speak out against the way the Pentagon and the way our politicians use the military. You know, I read Dennis's book, and you know, some of the stuff is just unbelievable. The real reasons why we went to war in Iraq, and you know, our country, you know, the Pentagon has shifted from something that was concerned about defense of our country, you know, they officially call it the Department of Defense, to engaging in offensive wars that really have nothing to do with defending our country, and as a matter of fact, make our country more vulnerable. So, you know, there's a lot of us, like myself, that oppose what the Pentagon is doing, what our mostly what our government, what the politicians are telling the Pentagon to do, and but you know, we don't have the credibility. You know, the big generals stand up there in their uniforms with all the ribbons and stuff, and you know, they tell us people that believe in a peaceful world that you know, we're all crazy. We're all you know, la la land hippies, and so it's without these messengers, without people who have the credibility of the people up here with me, those of us that are seeking a more peaceful world can't really get anywhere. So I co-founded the Eisenhower Media Network, which these two folks are part of, to promote former military officers that have an opposing view to the Pentagon and to this incredible push for more and more wars. It's kind of amazing that, you know, for people who are in their 20s, the United States has been at war their entire lives. War has become a norm when it should be a very seldom used last resort. So I've learned a heck of a lot from Dennis and Larry, and I hope that you will as well. I've read Dennis's book. It's a good, quick, easy read. You know, he puts it all in layman's language, and and you end up finding out how we ended up being in the situation that we're in, and that book has the courage and the guts to name names, to name the names of these exalted political and military leaders that have lied to the American public. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dennis and tell us.
Well, first of all, let me do a little bit of house cleaning. I wanted to thank these two gentlemen that are here with me on the stage. Larry, one of my best friends. Ben, who has made this possible through the Eisenhower Media Network. If it wasn't for these two gentlemen, to be quite frank with you, I don't think I would be here. And so I really want to thank them. Also, they always say that there's a great, beautiful woman behind every man or in front of a man. And in my case, it's my beautiful wife, Deborah. Now, by the way, she gets mad when I say this. I didn't marry her when she was 13, okay? We were only two years apart, and I always tell that story.
I married my wife when she was 16.
But the big question that I always get asked is, why did I write the book? And just a quick story, and some of you have already read it, will understand why I did. And it goes back to 9/11, where something so devastating we had never experienced before. The homeland had been hit. And it impacted all of our lives, especially those of you here in New York City. Likewise, in the Washington, D.C. area, with the Pentagon being hit, where, as I've told some of you, I've spent half my life in the Pentagon. And oh, by the way, that's where I met my wife. And I won't tell that story, Deborah, but I will tell you that she didn't care too much for me when we first met. And it took over a year. Look at her. It took over a year for me to get her out on a date, and 41 years later. Wow. Yeah. But like all of us, after 9/11, we were confused, we were upset, and I'll just use the word, we wanted revenge, to be quite frank with you, and we went to war. After that, all of a sudden, me, as an Air Force, as an airman, I started hearing about us going to Iraq, and I couldn't understand why. What did Iraq have to do with 9/11 and Afghanistan? And I thought I would never know. But as young men and women of our military service started asking me, Chief, as they called me, why are we going to Iraq? And I had no answer for them. And I had a reputation of being honest and straight with our military members. That was my success. As Ben alluded to, I was very successful, very blessed to have a number of commands where I advised 4-star generals. And I was the command for those. I always like to say this for the veterans in the house. Let's give the veterans in the house a hand, please. But as veterans, we've gone to be what we call joint. And so I always like to say for the Marines, I was the sergeant major. For the Navy, I was the command master chief. For the Army, I was the command sergeant major. And for those of us airmen, I was the command chief. And I say that to say this. My reputation was to be honest and straight. And I had no honest answer of why we were going to Iraq. And I decided to retire so that I could speak out about the war. And being in the military for 28 years, it was hard making an adjustment, to what we call the civilian life. I lasted a month in some corporation I won't mention. And some folks in the Pentagon said, Dennis, you need to come back. And so I did. And somehow, divine intervention, because I always wondered, why did we truly go to Iraq? And I ended up working with, some of the names you've heard, Donald Rumsfeld, Paul Wolfowitz, and the main man I worked for, a guy by the name of Doug Feith, who I call the mastermind. behind all the pre-war planning. Now, what really drove me to write this book as part of a team I was on, as part of declassifying all the pre-planning documents, and the word that we were getting was, it was about, because of the historical significance of that war and the controversy of the war, that for those of you that are part of the press, that we would probably receive a lot of freedom of information requests, and so we wanted to be ready. But as I dove deep into the reasonings, I found out that Doug Feith, all of you heard the term cherry picking the intel to go to the war. Well, I found out that Doug Feith was writing a book, and he was cherry picking the intel to declassify it, to write that book, to slant everything towards it being favorable. As I saw him doing that, it bothered me. So one day I was walking, and for those who have been to the Pentagon, it's called the mall area of the Pentagon, which is where I met my wife. And I saw something unusual. I saw about 30 members of our service from all branches, but it was something different. Some were missing an arm, some were missing a leg, some wore patches. And I saw a young man that was strolling along in a wheelchair and lost a leg and had a patch over his eye. And I went up to him and said, how are you doing, young man? And he I'm just doing okay. And that broke my heart. And I thought back to, like many of you in this room have said, oh, I think we went to war because of oil. I think we went to war because of Halliburton. I think we went to war because of the military-industrial complex. I think we went to war because Bush wanted revenge for his daddy. I kept asking myself, well, we really don't know why we went to war. I hear all these excuses, but worse than that, I started asking military members, why did we go to war? None of them knew. And so when I saw all those injured folks walking through the Pentagon for a tour, I got to be quite frank to you. As a man, it brought tears to my eyes. Because I thought about, here it is, they almost made the ultimate sacrifice, but over 4,500 dead. And I said, these will be lasting wounds for the rest of their lives. And they don't know why they went to war. And so I went back to what we call a skiff. Those of you that had clearances understand what a skiff is. And I said, I'm in a room full of history here. I'm in the Daniel Ellsberg room of history, if you know what I mean, for those of you that, God rest his soul. I didn't have the guts to do what he did. I did it the right way, I think. But somebody asked me in the audience earlier, hey, were you afraid? Did you release any classified material? No, I didn't, because that was my business to declassify material. But I did, as some of you will see in the book, that I sent it to the Pentagon and they redacted it. Redaction means some of the things, hey, well, we don't quite want you to say this yet. Okay, but we're going to fight that. We're going to get that released one day, too. But I wrote this book because I thought it was only fair for the veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars to know why they went to war. It is a shame for those of us that have been in the military. We always have an objective of why. We go in and we get out. And that's what we did when Larry was a special assistant to the chairman during the first Gulf War. We had an objective. We went in and got Saddam out of Kuwait, and we came back home. But we didn't know what the objective was. And so when I saw 4,500 were killed in action over a reason they did not know, and over 100,000 that have been wounded for the rest of their lives. So those that have lost their lives and those that have been wounded for life and their families, I thought it was right that I write this book. And anybody that want to criticize me on that, I could care less, because I'm trying to do what's right for our veterans that are here tonight and all the other veterans that are out there. And so that is exactly why I wrote the book. I wrote it primarily for those that are veterans, but I also wrote it for the young folks to help them understand how do we get into these wars. I got to tell you, whether you agree or not, I wholeheartedly support all the student protests, because it's going to take them to change what is happening today. And you're going to find in the book, and as we open it up and you start asking questions, you're going to find in the book that things that are going on in Gaza right now, that started with the Iraq War. And so you'll learn that, and we may discuss it tonight, and you'll learn that in the book as well. But when I say I wrote it for all audiences, there'll be some of you that have kept track of what's been going on in history with the Middle East and so forth. You have ideas why we went to war. Well, hopefully this is going to confirm for some of you, foreign policy experts, some of the things you may have thought. Hopefully I've confirmed them in the book. Some of you had no idea. Now I got to tell you, there's no bigger honor. I was telling some folks, there's no bigger honor than I got a call from today is what, Monday? I got a call, I think Saturday or Sunday, from my daughter. And she said, wow, Dad, I never knew how all this tied in. And that was my goal when Ben mentioned, I wrote it in plain language. I didn't try to get sophisticated or anything like that for all the foreign policy experts. I wanted people to understand, and I tried to articulate it in a way that folks can understand and follow. And that was my goal. And so far, the reviews I'm getting from folks I've talked to, I'm meeting that objective. So I'm not going to talk long, but I want to do one other thing. Again, I want to recognize Larry here because how we became so close. I challenged my bosses. I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, home of Fort Bragg, for all the Army folks, now Fort Liberty. And I saw all the returning soldiers coming back from the Vietnam War. And you'll see in the book, I worked for General Dick Myers when we were out in the Pacific and in the Space Command, and we became the vice chairman and chairman. I was still his confidant because we remained friends throughout to even today. As you saw, if you look at the back of the book, though he said, I can't endorse everything you're doing, Dennis, but I can tell folks we served for over 30 years. And the bottom line, he respects what I'm doing. And, but I want to thank Larry because not Larry, but a previous boss of mine knew how I felt about our men and women in the service. And there was a big Washington Post story for those of you that are part of the press back in 2007 about the treatment of our war wounded at Walter Reed. And I thought it was just a disgrace. We had members returning from war staying in molded rooms, mind you. Molded rooms of our folks that were returning from war. And when I saw that, I was sitting in the Pentagon in my skiff, and my head went up to the ceiling. And so I was contacted about going over to Walter Reed and taking care of our war wounded. And I did that from 2008, after I left the Pentagon, to 2022. Now, why am I telling you this? One of the things I used to do is members of Congress came through sort of so-called caring visit to see the war wounded. I would challenge them. And I'll tell you right now, I'm surprised I never was fired. But I would challenge them and say, well, if you voted for this war, this is the result of that war. I would introduce them to the most severely wounded men and women that we had so they could see the result of war, especially when it's based on deceit and lies. Larry Wilkerson was one of the first Bush administration officials to come out and say, hey, we may have screwed the American people. And I loved that, and I reached out to Larry at the time. Larry didn't know who I was, but I say, Google me up, I'm legit, and come out and visit Walter Reed. And he did. And I got to tell you, as I tell Larry, as I did all those members of Congress, I tried to introduce Larry to the most severely wounded that we had at Walter Reed at the time. And I think it touched him. I introduced him to a triple amputee, and it really touched him. And I said, Larry, you have a platform, and you need to go out there and speak about these ill wars. And he did. And we've been friends ever since. And so I'll leave it with that. And I don't know if Larry want to say a few words, and then Ben can inquire our minds, and then we'll turn it over to you all.
Yeah, the triple amputee was an Air Force sergeant who was an EOD guy, explosive ordnance. I think he was doing his second tour, as I recall, and he was almost at the end of that tour in Afghanistan. And he was disarming an IED, and he stood up because he wasn't having good communications with his partner down the line. He was in full gear, helmet, everything. And either they command detonated or the IED just detonated on its own, took both his legs off and his arm. And so when I met him, he told me a story. I don't know if Dennis even heard this, but the story he told me was the congressman who'd just come up to his room to visit him. And he was 19 surgeries. You can imagine how he felt. I think he'd been there almost that long a time too, 19 months or something like that. They brought his wife up, thank God, and given her a room next to him, so he had the comfort of having his wife there. And he said the congressman came into my room and he started to immediately thank me for my service. And I looked at him and fixed him as best I could with my eyeballs. And I said, "Don't thank me for my service. Thank me for my sacrifice, which you can plainly see." And he said, the guy got an embarrassed look on his face, turned around and walked out of the room. And he looked at me and said, "That was my best moment. That's my best moment."
Yeah.
So, and the Marine who was sitting there at the table with us, who'd lost his right leg at the knee, he just started laughing at the story. "I'm not badly off. Look at him.
Triple amputee.
Two legs missing and an arm missing." So this introduced me to the graphic evidence that Dennis was just talking about of the lies and deceit that led to the war in Iraq. And to a certain extent, which you'll see revealed in the book, also, the lies and deceit that kept us in Afghanistan far beyond the time we should have been there and killed a lot more people than the Iraq War. But think about this for a minute. Your country has been at war ever since 9/11. I had students at William & Mary who would come into my final seminars a year ago or so, and they would say to me, when I would start my introduction to the seminar, they would say, "Professor, I wasn't even born then." And I realized, 20 years plus had gone by since the time that I was beginning to talk about. And all 20 of those years, these kids had never lived in a country that wasn't at war. And painfully and agonizingly, there isn't any end to it, it appears. We'll either do it through proxies, like in Ukraine or in Gaza, or we'll do it on our own. War is about the only thing we know how to do in terms of foreign policy today. Please.
Ben, anything on your mind that you would like to, before we open it up, because we think it's more important to hear from you all, especially those that have read the book, and hopefully you're enticed the appetite for others who have not to purchase it and learn more about it. But Ben, anything that caught your attention?
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me when I read the book was that, politicians tend to talk about boots on the ground. We need to put some boots on the ground. And these guys see their role as caring for and protecting our soldiers. And it's not boots on the ground. It's people that end up getting destroyed, either psychologically or physically. And the question is, under what circumstances should we put our people into that situation where they can get killed, physically dismembered, psychologically destroyed? And you can see it if it's to defend our country, but none of these wars are about defending our country. So that struck me a lot reading the book. And the other thing that continues to strike me about the two gentlemen sitting beside me and the rest of the members of the Eisenhower Media Network, who are all retired officers speaking out against their former employer, is that, most high-level Pentagon people end up working for corporations. A lot of them defense contractors making big bucks, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, going back and lobbying the people they used to work with. And these guys not only have the courage to speak out against that, but they've given up huge amounts of money. But for somebody who has integrity, it's not something that I'm sure either of these guys ever thought about. I mean, you just have to say what's right and say what's true. I've worked with some other groups of former military people 20 or 30 years ago, and there's a club, and you could be a member of that club in good standing, and you get a whole lot of benefits, a whole lot of perks, and most people do that. They just go along to get along. They know the stuff that's going on isn't really the way it's supposed to be, but, don't rock the boat and get your money. And but I'm proud to be with these two guys that stand up for what's right. And we need to support them. We need to use their legitimacy and spread the word. And today we can all spread the word, because it's all about social media. It's all about what's on your phone. And so I hope that you'll help us do that. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
I haven't looked at your book, Mr. Fritz, but I appreciate the thesis, and I appreciate also you, Mr. Bogus, and all the courageous efforts you've been making to redress these evils. And as one of the people who have essentially never lived in the United States that wasn't involved in some form of rapacious war, I can only thank you sincerely for what you're doing. My question is, you're both military men, and so I imagine that you've been involved in the mobilization of people throughout your time. And here you have a group full of people who are presumably here because they're people of conscience and they want to do something. We are aware of the fact, I hope, that there are increased mobilizations all throughout NATO to increase the war mobilization against Russia. Russia has responded by mobilization of its tactical nuclear weapons. This isn't a television show. It's an actual world strategic situation that we're all bound up in. And I want to know what you, as military men, would recommend concretely that this group of people in this room can do to halt this war escalation.
Hey, can I?
Yeah. Can I tell him how much worse it is than he thinks?
And that's what, can I make one comment? And I want you to do that. I was going to exactly say that, because I want to turn it over to you, because you're going to hear it straight from a great professional here, okay? But when you talk about the mobilization, you'll see in the book, that was one of the reasons why I put in my retirement papers, because we were mobilized. For those of you that are in the military, you understand about mobilization lines, where you're mobilizing to deploy, if you will. And I was out, I think it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, mobilizing for some folks to go, to that part of the world. And it kept bothering me. I'm sending some folks off to war that I don't know why, as a leader, and I didn't know why, and it bothered me. And so mobilization is what made my final decision to step aside so I could speak out. Now, I want to put in a plug for something you just said, and I'm going to turn it over to Larry, because I want to put in a plug with something that Ben said earlier, the Eisenhower Media Network. And I want you to follow us, because there's I think it's Do you mind, fellows, would you all stand up with some of the Eisenhower Media Network fellows that are here? And a lot of you in this room know this guy, Matt Ho. He's the associate director. Yeah. And so you need to follow us on the Eisenhower Media Network, and also we also have our individual, sites as well. But we talk about Ukraine and all these other wars and the mobilization and what's going on in Europe right now. And so the plug I want to say is that follow the Eisenhower Media Network. And in fact, if you go out there, you'll look and you'll see a paid ad that when this first began, and we talk about the United States should be a force for peace. And so I don't know if any of you read that. It was in the New York Times. I think it was May of last year. But go out there and take a look at that piece, and that'll give you a lot of information about how we feel about that. I'm going to turn it over to Larry.
Your question goes to the heart of the major problem we're confronting today. It's an existential problem, and it centers on Ukraine. Gaza is a hellhole, a genocide, no question about it. But at this point, at least, it's not existential. Ukraine is. And the reason it's existential is because of what Dennis wrote in this book and much more has broken the back of our armed forces over the last 20 years. The Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, more important than any of those active services, their reserve components, are so short today of men and women that we could not mobilize for a war if we tried. That is the honest-to-God truth. We are broken in the most important components of our military, partly, largely, because of these wars over the last 20 years. Not only that, the propensity of young people in America to serve in the armed forces, in the 30-plus years we've been polling that propensity, is lower than it's ever been before. It's 9%. So we are so short each year now recruiting that we can't even man our ships, for example, in the Navy. Eisenhower has been in the Red Sea now for so long that there are young men and women on that ship that haven't seen home in 9 or 10 months. And they have no prospect of coming home because we don't have a carrier to replace it. 5 of our carriers are in port being worked on, being fixed. 1 is tied to the security treaty in Japan. So out of 11 carriers, we only have about 6 we can put to sea. What does that mean in real terms? It means that Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, his national security advisor, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the other chiefs are all backing their strategy with respect to Ukraine on, you guessed it, our nuclear warheads. That's all we have to back up the rhetoric that Joe and Tony and Jake are putting out there, that Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO Secretary General, is putting out there, that Macron from time to time puts out there, from other NATO leaders. Rishi Sunak is an absolute idiot in London. They are all counting on our nuclear weaponry being a big enough deterrent that they can win in Ukraine. And I'm telling you right now, that's nonsense. That's nonsense. What we are courting is America being, again, the first nation in the world to use nuclear weapons. And I'll guarantee you Vladimir Putin will respond. That's how bad a situation we're in today.
Can I maybe just make one comment? And I hate to scare you like this, but where we may slightly disagree, because I will tell you, if you think about this, the United States of America is the only country to utilize a nuclear weapon. And so I worry that will Putin wait for us to be the first use? Because I can tell you right now, I did an interview last year, and I worked in Space Command, as been alluded to, and I saw our nuclear weapons up close. And that was my job, to oversee all the military men and women with our nuclear weapons. And it worries me, this right now and last year when it started, this is probably the most concerning I've ever been in regards to the use of nuclear weapons. And so I tell you that so that each and every one of you, when you leave out of here tonight, you need to be thinking about that and sharing it with your family and friends. One other thing I want to add, Larry, I'm going to turn it back over to you, is that we, the United States of America, I sometimes get called as a traitor because of the fact I'm trying to stop this war in Ukraine because we're using Ukraine and its people in a proxy war to so-called weaken Russia. So it's hurting us financially, even though we don't have. Can I comment on something in the book? I always kid with folks, I was kidding with the team today about boots on the ground. I hate that because we're talking about somebody's mom, dad, brother, sister, husband, or wife. And they're not boots on the ground. They are human beings. Now, with that said, though we don't have military personnel there, we're using Ukraine. Their infrastructure is being destroyed. People are being killed. We're fighting a proxy war that could lead to nuclear war. And that worries me. So I want you to leave out of this room. This is probably the most fearful I've ever been. Larry, I don't know if you have any things to add, but I know there's like 2 or 3 questions out there. I guess that generated some conversation there.
No, let's let them ask some more questions. Please.
So, Colonel, to pick up on a point you made earlier, is it fair to say that our foreign policy was hijacked by the Pentagon and the CIA sometime in the 90s? Maybe you could pick the exact year. And could that be reversed by the right president choosing the right Secretary of Defense and State and Director of Central Intelligence? Could that literally be reversed with the key people being replaced?
Absolutely, but tell me where you're going to find them. Where are they and what are their names? Because I want to get on their team before I die. Of course. Your question about the CIA and the intelligence agencies in general is a good one. We have allowed the relationship between the military, especially its special operating forces, and the CIA to become incestuous. And now the CIA plans a direct action like getting Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, Pakistan, and then the military carries it out. That way, the CIA does not have to report its activities to its oversight committees in the Congress, nor do the special operating forces because they're detailed as CIA. And that's been going on for some time. And Victoria Nuland, for example, was using some of the Nazis in Ukraine to go after Russians with them. And Vladimir Putin didn't like that very much. And in after press conference hinted at it, but no one picks up on it because these people get away with it. In this case, Victoria Nuland was operationalizing the National Security Council the same way Ronald Reagan did in Iran-Contra. He almost got impeached for doing that. We don't even say a boo about it today. Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, not wearing a uniform, not in the chain of command statutorily. Jake Sullivan is giving rudder orders to admirals in the Red Sea, telling them when to go and where to go and whether to leave or come back and so forth. This is insanity. This is the way you get Eisenhower sunk. Imagine if Putin were to suddenly decide he was going to give one of his faster, more deadly missiles to the rebels, the insurgents, whatever you want to call them, the Houthis in Yemen, and they shot Eisenhower with one of those. You'd have 5,000 Americans in the water or dead almost instantly. What would we do then? That's a huge question for me. I think about that every day. What will we do? Because those missiles, minimum speed is about 9 times the speed of sound. That's 761 miles per hour times 9. That's like trying to hit a speeding bullet with a bullet. You can't defend against that. Not only that, it's a sea skimmer. It doesn't come up very high, so you don't get much warning at all. Eisenhower would go down. She would go down. And we would be at war with Russia instantaneously. And China would probably pitch in with Russia.
Hey, Larry, if I can make a comment, and it really goes back to the late 80s when our foreign policy, and a lot of you heard this term, and I got a chapter in there about it, neocons. And they started with the Reagan administration, and there are equal opportunities. They don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. Victoria Nuland was working deep inside the neocons in the Republican Party, and now it's almost became number 2 in the State Department. But there was a lot of pushback with that. And so it started back then. They started at their first primary goal was to, as we're trying to do now, weaken Russia. But then they started turning their eyes to the Middle East, and that's where it came into play in the Iraq War, which caused me to write about it, because it's all about an agenda to control the world. And it's what goes back to the 80s when our foreign policy. One of the things I put in the book, I said, and as Larry alluded to just now, all of us need to be taking a look when we're making our decisions, especially at the presidential level. We need to be looking at who's advising them. That's like, who's advising them to make our decision whether we're going to vote for them, because of the fact those that are doing the advising while they're in the campaign season, they're the ones that's going to end up being the cabinet members. And then that's how you can figure out what their doctrine is going to be. And I got to tell you, the neocons, their strategy is long-term. It started with Wolfowitz back in the Pentagon in the 80s under the Reagan administration. It started back then. And just think, the Iraq War, he was still carrying it out as the deputy SecDef. And then now, Victoria Nuland, until no longer in the State Department, she was carrying it out in the Biden administration. And oh, by the way, you'll see in the book when I talk about the neocons, they're not going to give up. It's a long-term strategy.
And Congress has abdicated their responsibility.
Absolutely. They've been bought off.
You know
in many
why?
respects.
We want to be candid. I mean, you know why. Exactly. You know, people are afraid to say that, but we must be. Hey, listen, we got to be honest now. We're saying, listen, remember I said I am so proud of our students at our campus. They try to demonize them. And what they're speaking truth, and I'm so proud of, and we need to support them. Because of the fact that we're seeing through social media currently how our Congress is responding to their own special needs and desires. Not about you, not about me, and not about our country. They're trying to stay in the office. And that's why I hate career politicians, because they can be bought off.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the interview with Tom Massey, Tom Massey, the Republican from Kentucky, who was the only Republican other than Mike Lee of Utah that we got to come over on the legislation, the war powers legislation, to get us out of Yemen. And we got it passed in both houses, but Trump vetoed it. Massey said, every single Congress member, senator or representative, has an AIPAC handler. And the AIPAC handler must be consulted with before they make a decision. And if the AIPAC handler tells them that the decision they're thinking about is wrong, they reverse their decision. So if it has any implications whatsoever for the Levant, for the Middle East, that AIPAC handler is going to decide what happens. And you'll find this in Dennis's book.
I was just going to say
big time.
Yeah, I wrote, listen, at one time, and like I said, we got to be honest, and I'm so happy with social media that more people are finding out about this. I couldn't talk about AIPAC and our Congress. It was only Larry and me, 10 or 15 years ago. I think Larry almost got censored at George Washington because of the fact that, it wasn't popular to talk about that back then. And so I started writing my book, as my wife would tell you, years ago. And my wife, when are you going to finish this thing? My daughter said, Dad, I'll be an old woman by the time you finish that thing. And so you'll go in there. I was talking about the neocons and AIPAC back then. I give historical, not now, I give a historical view of the people then. And Doug Feith, he talks about, look what we've done. But it wasn't popular to talk about then. But I put it in my book so you'll see the historical, how we got to where we are today.
But at least we had James Baker back then.
Can I tell you? Wow.
Well, we got these kids. These kids on the campuses, I shouldn't call them kids, these young men and women from UCLA to Columbia, they are giving AIPAC help.
Oh, my goodness. Thank goodness.
Larry, a quick question. If the Congress has abdicated its responsibility, why is it that the media, mainstream media,
they're bought off too.
Why is that? And it's almost like media malpractice. They're not informing the public.
We had a Federal Communications Commission decision some years ago that John McCain was very influential on. that essentially allowed the American mainstream media to be consolidated under 6 or 7 billionaires. One of them you know most about, probably Rupert Murdoch. That's who has owned our media since that time. And our media, our mainstream media, that's CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, sings the government's tune on war, taxes, or anything else. It sings the government's tune. That's the reason this new social media is so important, because it's a counter to that. You have to be careful because, you know, some of it's sort of rusty too, but it's at least a counter to the mainstream media, and if it's war, I've found it to be a pretty darn good counter to the mainstream media.
Yeah.
New York Times, pick up the New York Times anytime and read that baby, where it has some kind of insinuation about the war in Gaza, or it has some kind of insinuation about the war in Ukraine, and tell me that you can find any balanced commentary in that newspaper about those two conflicts. You'll find a little paragraph here and a paragraph there that attempts to establish some balance, but the vein running through the story is the United States and NATO are right. The United States and Israel are right. The 7 October attacks, for example, were out of the blue. There was no previous guilt or anything. They just came out of the blue. And tragic though they were, that's not the truth. You know that's not the truth if you follow the situation at all. This is a festering sore that's been there for a long time. And Mof Shavaz, one of the former IDF commanders, said it most eloquently. He said, if your policy is hate, you will have to kill all the time. Bingo.
Larry, if I can make a comment going back to his question too. I have a chapter in the book, and it's entitled Disinformation Strategy. And one of the things, when I was in the Pentagon, my office was right across from the media. A lot of people don't realize they have an office, a whole suite in the Pentagon. And the stories are slanted in favor of the Pentagon and any particular administration. Why? Because of the fact, oh, by the way, you heard this term, my source, my Pentagon senior official. If you slant it our way, I will become your source, but I need you to say this as well. Somebody asked me earlier about Judith Miller. I don't know if you heard that name before. She was one of the best sources of the disinformation strategy to the run-up to the war and all of that. If you were going to tell their side of the story, we're going to make you pop. We're going to make you a hero in the eyes of those pundits that are following what we're saying, because we're going to give you the information and we want you to put out there, but you're going to get the story. And so the media is tied in by way of not only being bought, but at the same time, that's how they get their stories and get those so-called sources, because of the fact the information is slanted so that you can have that story, be the one to get that story. The other thing I would mention as well, when we look at, if any of you watch MSNBC News, I go to all of my wife, I'm all over. I'm at Fox, CNN, MSNBC. I stopped watching MSNBC because of the fact, man, it was just crazy. The story was so slanted. Any of you that follow Mehdi, he had to get his own thing through social media because he was trying to tell the truth. And that's why social media is so important. And that's, once again, I have to keep talking about, as Larry alluded to, the young folks, because they're getting it real time. And I'll tell you another secret, too. Ben calls me a lurker. I didn't understand that term, but I'm a TikTok nut, and I'm an old guy. And my wife can tell you at 1 o'clock, because I was seeing things real time. The so-called balloon that we saw a year and a half ago, I saw it on TikTok first. And all of a sudden, CNN, I saw it the next day. So I can tell you right now, working in intelligence and all that good stuff, TikTok is not about the Chinese going to get all the information because, like, they got it if they want it. Likewise, our government, you better be more fearful of our government. But because of TikTok is probably the most liberal in letting us get our message out, that is the way to go. And because right now, I got to be honest with you, we can't trust our media.
I'm going to tell you about one time that we had a dovetail again. I was reading your book over again coming up on the train, and the passage about the disinformation campaign. I was sitting in a meeting with Tory Clark, who was then the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs. The Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, responsible for the public affairs operations of the Pentagon. She also happened to be a lawyer. She knew the law. So we're sitting in the office and we're talking with all these different people from the interagency group, you know, Homeland Security, Defense, all the rest of the government. And the meeting ended and I lingered afterwards. I was then Chief of Staff of the State Department. And I said, Tori, when we were alone, you realize it's against the law to propagandize the American people.
Against the law.
And she said, oh yeah, I know that. I said, well, what you were just discussing is propagandizing the American people with respect to Saddam Hussein, WMD, Al-Qaeda, and war. Yes, I realize that too. Why are we doing it then? Because I was ordered to do it. Okay. I went back and I told Powell, I said, first of all, I said, we're going to war. He said, no, we're not. We got the inspectors going back. No, you're not listening, boss. We're going to war. And we're going to disinformation the American people in order to get them to support it. What do you mean? And I explained it to him. And I don't know whether he took that back to Condi and the NSC or not, but a very short time after that, we became the biggest propaganda against the American people with the United Nations. So I didn't have many legs to stand on after that.
Yeah, and I have that in the book because of the fact that their goal was to scare us to death and fearing that we had to go to war, you know, after 9/11. And they were all over the place. You'll see that in the book, too. They were all over the place starting in January when the Bush administration came into office. They were looking for excuses. That long-term strategy I mentioned to you that goes all the way back to the 80s, they came into office looking to go to war in the Middle East, as they call it, as we call it, the Middle East, okay? Mm-hmm. There's a story behind that, too. I won't get into that, how we cut up different parts of the world and gave it our own names. But anyhow, they came in looking to go to war. They had no excuse to go to war. They were going, some of you in the military know about Northern Watch, Southern Watch. After the first Gulf War, where we created these protected covers, Southern Watch was protect the Shias, Northern Watch would protect those oil fields with, and so we were looking at excuses. We were going to say Saddam bombed, you know, the Shia. And then unfortunately, 9/11 happened to give them the excuse that we're going to scare the American people so badly that they're going to support us into going to war. And off we went.
I just wanted to recognize Bill Hartung. You've had your hand up.
Sorry about that, Bill. Yeah.
Hey, there's a warrior. New York Times today. Or was it yesterday?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect proof. We get these paragraphs every month.
Yeah, I thought your John Daly was even better than the New York Times.
So thanks for doing this. I'm only a veteran of the peace group, which is hard enough. But, you know, you said the neocons are in it for the long haul. Obviously, we need to be. But some of these things could happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
How do we mobilize in that way? I feel like the students are kind of the model. They're standing up to power. They're not backing down. It's growing. How could we kind of transplant that into a broader public movement? I think a lot of people know that these things are happening, but they don't feel that they can make a difference. So how do we get past that?
I think that group that came down to Washington a week ago and circled the White House and protested for hours
was there.
a good sign of what you can do. But we need many more. We need many more, and we need them in more cities, and we need them in more strategic places, like the kids on the, or I keep calling them kids, like the young men and women on the campuses. They're kids to me, I'm 80.
Right.
We do. We need a lot of American people rising up and saying no more. That sounds trite, but it's what democracy means. We need to take our government back. And it might be difficult, and it might be hard, and it might be time-consuming, and we might have to suffer for it, but we need to do it. No one else is going to do it for us. Donald Trump's not going to do it for us. Joe Biden's certainly not going to do it for us. No one I can see on the horizon, from Gavin Newsom to whomever, is going to do it for us. We have to take our republic back.
There's no better way to do that than, I get asked that question all the time. You know, how do we do it? And I can tell you, as Larry mentioned about the, as we call it, the red line protests. And there were a few of you in this room that were there also. And Josie is part of the fellows. We were there, and we put together a veterans group. And it was very well supported. But there's no better time to do it, the next opportunity time to do that, to show our government how we feel about this and to gather the masses. As Ben used to call me, can't do that no longer. I'm not a lurker anymore. I'm posting now. And I posted out on TikTok that there's 150 million people on TikTok. I said, you can't tell me if BB decides he wants to come and speak before our Congress,
yes,
that we should have 1 million people on Washington.
Yes, sir.
And that's how we do it. And so I posted that on TikTok, and we're getting a lot of hits. And so when you walk out of this room, that's what you need to keep in mind. If BB decides he's going to continue with that trip here, you need to start talking about it. We need to start getting buses and get to Washington that day. I guarantee you. Okay? There's the answer right there. That's the beginning right there. Congress look at numbers. Money don't mean anything with social media. And for those of y'all in New York, I don't care how you feel, y'all need to be supporting Bowman. Y'all need to be telling everybody, because AIPAC is trying to take him down. So y'all need to support him.
Wouldn't it be marvelous if we could do another January the 6th, but the other way around?
But peaceful though, yeah.
Circle the White House.
Yeah, circle the White House.
10-line stick. You aren't getting in here, BB.
Oh, yeah, now we can do that peacefully, yeah.
Over our dead bodies, will you get in here?
But listen, I mean, take that serious. Like I said, I posted it on TikTok, and I'm getting a lot of traction from it. If he comes still, we need to make sure that's when we can do it. And for those of you in the press and those of you that have a big social media following, you need to leave out of this room tonight and start posting that if BB comes here July, I can't remember the exact date, but July 24th, that we.
General strike on the 20th.
I saw, I saw. You need to go out there. They've already started. I saw that, and so that's how we do it.
I bet you Medea will be there.
Medea will be. Listen, do y'all know Medea of Cold Pink?
You baby.
Oh my goodness, she is all over the place, and one of our other Eisenhower Media Network fellows, Ann Wright. I'm sure a lot of you know Ann Wright. Yeah. Ann was going to be here tonight, but Ann has been all over the place. She actually lives in Hawaii. And she sent Matt and I an email a few days ago and said, guys, I got to get back home. I'm tired. And if those that follow social media, she and Medea of Cold Pink has been on the hill. Some of us did it with them. You remember that? Yeah. And so they've been just nonstop. And we got to help them out. But I can guarantee you, Medea and both Ann Wright, as Josie could tell you, they were both there at the Red Line protest. If you understand the Red Line protest, Biden said, hey, Rafah will be the red line. What happened there? You know? And
they were in Istanbul waiting for the Turks, and the Turks kept screwing them.
Flotilla.
For the flotilla to go across with food to Gaza. And they unflagged the ships so the ships couldn't sail. I mean, they did everything they possibly could, and they're sitting there on their own dime week after week in Istanbul. It wasn't cheap. Very frustrating for them.
Yeah. Hey, let me just mention another thing, going back to your question as well. And this is why Larry and I are doing what we're doing now, to continue to talk to folks. And so we've been kidding, and Larry said, I'm going to write the script. This may be the beginning of the Larry and Dennis Roadshow, to get out and galvanize more people, to let them, understand how important this is. As Ben, always talk about us, we're the street cred, if you will, to be able to talk about them. We've seen it, done that. Larry more so than me, and got the T-shirt. And so that we can help galvanize, more people to understand this. But it starts when we walk out of this room, to continue to spread the word. And that 1 million person march, hey, it's happened before a couple times. There's been 1 million people. I remember the 1 million man march, so we can make it happen. Right here. Ben, right here, go ahead. You got you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I didn't know about your book until Matt sent me an email. Thank you all. I'll get to as soon as I can. We have stood up against our wars. A lot of us here did know about Iraq being blood for oil, and we marched, many thousands of us in these streets. They didn't listen. Our reps are not listening. We marched off the war. So we are seeing all these student protests right now. It's true. And we are seeing right now the race for nuclear weapons. It is true, full out. Since Obama signed the directives in 2010, this is not new. We've had a nuclear race, but what I'd like us also to mobilize around, and I love the Netanyahu, we gotta do that, but is every year, and you both know this, there is a nuclear deterrence summit in Washington, D.C. All our manufacturers, all our Pentagon officials, our think tanks for nuclear weapons go there, celebrate, push each other forward. The money is flowing, and we have a nuclear arms race. So what I'd love is, Ben, for you to bring your ice cream truck down there. Because really, we need to, last time there was 4 of us with a sign outside, so, you know, and this is every year. So if we can mobilize and cause a little discomfort down in Washington, D.C. this February for the next nuclear deterrence summit. Our fight against nuclear weapons, we know, has been going on all our lifetimes. We lost Dag Hammarskjöld in 1961, who was killed going to the source of uranium. John F. Kennedy was killed after he's got the first treaty going. We've lost a number of people around nuclear weapons. And I just think we do have to stop it. We're in a race that is just full speed ahead. No one's listening to us. All our members are ignoring. We have 2 bills in Congress. We have maybe 40 co-signers of these bills. We have 500 Congress people, 40 people have signed them. So anyway, there's a lot of mobilization to be doing, and I thank you for helping us do that. And ice cream would be a good way to,
Well,
to get
Let me tell you, your work paid off. In 1991, 92, at the end of the Cold War, we were so feverishly destroying 60,000 nuclear warheads, Russian and U.S., that the lawyers got involved because of liability issues. We were going too fast. They were afraid we were going to explode one. We got down to roughly 5,000 on their side, 5,000 on our side, and we had this really small amount, not in terms of destructive power, but a small amount in other countries like China, where maybe they had 400. Maybe Israel had a couple of hundred. Maybe India and Pakistan double that between them. But we were going down. And then along came the neoconservatives and George W. Bush. And we abrogated the ABM treaty without so much as a fare thee well, and reversed all of your work. We in the Pentagon had done a study on the Joint Staff where we could, and the Air Force actually pitched in on this, which is unbelievable. They came up with 300. We came up with 600. 600 warheads we said we can go down to, pay the American people back a peace dividend. This is official policy. H.W. Bush bought it, Baker bought it, Gorbachev bought it, Shevardnadze bought it, they all bought it, Kohl bought it, Europe bought it, NATO bought it. What happened? Along came George W. Bush and the neoconservatives in my administration, and we reversed everything overnight. We got to do it again.
Hey, let me just make a comment, and that's what I want to say to you. And I think about this. I get asked this all the time when you're saying, hey, we've been massing, nobody's listening. You can't give up. I think about Nelson Mandela, who was a guy who was considered a terrorist and ended up becoming the president. He never gave up, and we always continue to run. I think about Martin Luther King, civil rights. I wouldn't be sitting up here right now if it wasn't for Martin Luther King and the number of marches that he did. And then we think about, as Larry would say, the students nowadays, even though there's some, we're discussing that, it's for another time, but there would still be a draft if it wasn't for those student protests during the Vietnam War. And so we cannot stop. We must continue. But I get pressure all the time. I got Ben from one end telling me, hey, I'm running out of time, Fritz. I'm getting old. We got to make something happen now. I have Josie from the younger generation. I want to see results now. Well, I tell folks this is the most optimistic I've ever been. Because look at us right here. You're asking, what can we do? We have answers, what we can do, and it can start off in July the 24th. We're getting 1 million people in Washington, D.C., and don't let it stop. We continue. Okay. All righty? Now, we're getting a plug there of, hey, we only got 5 minutes. I was wondering about the time. I turned my phone down, and it kept going off, and I said, let me just turn it off because I keep track of the time. Let me just say this. I've said it. Larry has said it. Hey, it's in my book. Hey, it's in Dennis's book. You're probably saying, such a small book. How did you get so much information? Hey, it's in the book. Well, what I did, I just went straight to the meat to discuss certain things that was important. Some of those things that we talked about right now, as I stated earlier, in the book, what's happening in Gaza, it started with the Iraq War. A lot of people have said, you know, was it about oil? And Larry and I have this conversation all the time. There's a guy named Gary Vogler. Remember that name and look at his book, that we meet periodically and we talk about. Oil was definitely a subset of the Iraq War. But the bottom line of the Iraq War, and I just got to be honest with you, when you read it in there, was that BP Netanyahu has always wanted to do what he's doing now. He's always wanted. He was the finance minister during the beginning of the Iraq War, but he was still deep embedded in the government. And
you people, me, we have soldiers in Iraq
right now,
and soldiers in Syria today, and the soldiers and Marines in Syria are illegal under international law.
Sovereign countries.
Bashar al-Assad is still the legitimate ruler of Syria, and he does not approve of their presence there. And they are there not to fight ISIS. They're there to protect discounted price oil flowing out of Syria to Israel.
But let me just mention this now. As I said, oil was a subset. But in order to get there, Bibi always wanted to do what he's doing now. But the Bush administration, Wolfowitz at the time, knew that it could not take the pressure what's going on right now with all those killings of innocent women and children. And don't take this personally, but I always get upset when I hear about folks that are pro-life. Well, we have folks that are dying right now, babies in Gaza that are on this earth right now. They're dying. Where are the pro-lifers now? Think about that, and you need to challenge all pro-lifers. You know, we have folks that are living right now that are dying, and they're feeling their pain, okay? But the bottom line about the Iraq War was to do what's happening now, but the Bush administration said, hey, you just can't go in there and kill people. So what we're going to do is, you heard a lot of talk about regime change. Under the Clinton administration, he had a policy of regime change. Well, Rumsfeld was upset. Saddam is still there. And so what we need to do, we just can't go in there and kill all the Palestinians. What we're going to do, we're going to take out Saddam. We're going to start out with him first. Why can't we take out Saddam? Because we have a regime change policy. So we're going to...
Don't forget Gaddafi.
Oh, they took him out. They let the NATO and Europe do that. Yeah, they took out Gaddafi too. And guess what? Oh, by the way, when you talk about, I know 3 minutes, when we talk about, so much to talk about, we need to do this again. But when we talk about North Korea and Iran and all that, Libya gave up their nuclear weapons. And look what happened. So do you think Iran is going to give up their nuclear weapons? I don't blame them. I wouldn't either. But going back to this real quickly so we can sum this up, is that we decided that it was important. We were going to take out Saddam. We were going to take out Assad, as Larry alluded to, and then we were going to save Iran for last because their people, they truly support, you know, their government, and you want war with Iran, it's going to be a war because as part of the Iran nuclear deal that Trump came in and got rid of, the reason the neocons wanted to break it, they have a sophisticated ballistic missile system, and they're not going to give that up. They don't need nuclear weapons, to be quite frank, to destroy Israel because they have ballistic missiles. So the key reasons that we were going into this war was we were going to take out those governments, and then we were going to force, without Hamas and Hezbollah, we were going to force the Palestinians to make peace on Israel's terms. The second reason we decided, you know, we were going to do this, it goes back to that 1989 on the Paul Wolfowitz. You know, you hear this term, I don't like it, America's exceptionalism. We think nobody can leave the world better than us. And as I told somebody earlier, think about this when we talk about our government. Our government comes from citizens. All of us in this room, whether good or bad, have an agenda. Every one of us. You know, I have an agenda up here to make sure y'all buy my book, okay? All right. But we all have an agenda, okay? So when we talk about our government, the neocons, and what they came in with an agenda. And so we can't trust our government. We have to challenge our government because I could run for office and get elected and I have an agenda. I can run for office, which I was, and be offered $1 million if I follow my platform, AIPAC, their agenda. And so The Iraq War was about different agendas, and the reason I said it, I gave you two of them, about American exceptionalism. We're going to totally bullpit at Rumsfeld. I got a chapter about Rumsfeld. I call it the Rumsfeld Doctrine. He truly believed in American exceptionalism. He had no desire for oil, and we talk about that a lot. Now, Wolfowitz and Cheney, they did. So they all had agendas. And then the final agenda, this is true when you heard about this, Bush fully, in his heart, believed in democracy. He thought that if we spread through democracy throughout the world, it'll be a more peaceful world. So what they did with that, and Larry loves to talk about this, but he can't stand it. He talked about 2 different presidents, maybe 3. He had no foreign policy experience. So you get these so-called foreign policy experience, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, and all these guys. They lied to him, hey, this is how you can get your democracy, by way of following what we're telling you here. But oil was a subset, and I hope each and every one of you, as we stated here, hey, that's in Dennis's book, that's in the book. There's a lot of quick, fast reads in there that'll answer a lot of your questions, and it ties into right now. The key thing to remember is the Iraq War was the first stage of what is happening now. And I thank everybody for coming out tonight.